Hi, I'm Peter J. Ray. Welcome to Adventures in History. Today's topic is Abraham Lincoln, Part 17, 1864 Presidential Election, Victory versus General George B. McClellan. We stopped last time in 1864. President Lincoln was angry with speculators and profiteers who made money from the war and who bet against the U.S. government and winning the war, gold speculators in particular. And Lincoln said, quote, "I wish every one of them had his devilish head shot off." President Lincoln was told a story that there was a traveler on the frontier at night, and he was traveling during a thunderstorm. He was lost, his horse gave out, and lightning was his only source of light, and there was a crash of thunder near, and the man said, quote, "O Lord, if it is all the same to you, give us a little more light and a little less noise." So that's some good humor showing, he was looking for guidance. And I'll admit this, all the noise of the war and the destruction. A friend of President Lincoln said that the only thing that could defeat him in his attempt at re-election in 1864 is if General Ulysses S. Grant took Richmond, Virginia, the capital of the Confederacy, and then received the Democratic nomination for president. And President Lincoln said, quote, "Well, I feel very much about that as the man who said he didn't want to die particularly, but if he had got to die, that was precisely the disease he would like to die of." In June, summer of 1864, President Lincoln knew it was time to renew the oppressed spirits of the American people and the Union. He traveled to the great Central Fair of Philadelphia that had displays of art, statues, flowers, gardens, restaurants, raffles, and games, and he gave a speech there. Of course, also throughout the war, he frequently visited troops, and that raised President Lincoln's spirits and the spirits of the Union troops. President Lincoln said during this time, quote, "When General Grant once gets possession of a place, he holds on to it as if he had inherited it." By this time, General Grant was the top Union general and very effective. During this time, General Grant said to President Lincoln, quote, "You will never hear of me farther from Richmond than now, till I have taken it. I am just as sure of going into Richmond as I am of any future event. It may take a long summer day, but I will go in." So Grant, who had made his name in the West, was in the East, in Virginia, and of course Richmond, as the capital of the Confederacy, continued to be an important target. Although taking Richmond itself would not end the war, but it certainly would damage the morale of the Confederacy. President Lincoln knew that numerous setbacks were inevitable for the end of the war. Of course, there was about 9 months more of fighting going on. President Lincoln had trouble with Secretary of the Treasury, the Treasury Secretary, Salmon Chase, and he finally accepted Chase's resignation. Chase was interested in becoming president himself. And then President Lincoln started talking about having Chase appointed to the Supreme Court as Chief Justice. This was amazing because Chase had caused problems for Lincoln and brought him grief, but he was not vindictive, and he felt that Salmon Chase would be the best man for Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. In June, the Republican convention was held in Baltimore, Maryland, and President Lincoln was nominated for a second term as president. His vice president of his first term, Hannibal Hamlin, was dropped from the ticket, and Andrew Johnson of Tennessee was the new vice presidential nominee. Johnson was the only Southern senator to remain loyal to the Union. He had been, during this time previously, he had been the military governor of Tennessee, which had been a Confederate state but was under Union military occupation. Summer of 1864, the Northern public asked if victory was worth the enormous cost of human life in the Civil War. Now, that Republican convention was also called the National Union Party. They were trying to unify the country. Andrew Johnson of Tennessee was a Southerner, so that was part of this emphasis on unity. And he was a Democrat as well. Very strange situation. So the new vice presidential nominee. Now, in July of 1864, President Lincoln stood wearing his stovepipe hat at the parapet of a fort near Washington City, and he was witnessing Confederate General Jubal Early's army threatening the Capitol. And a sniper bullet struck an Army surgeon near him. Union Major General Horatio G. Wright ordered President Lincoln to leave the parapet, and Lincoln resisted. He didn't want to leave. And then General Wright said that the president would be removed by force. And then later, this General Wright said, quote, "The absurdity of the idea of sending off the president under guard seemed to amuse him," and President Lincoln agreed to move to safety. During 1864, President Lincoln signed a law in which "In God We Trust" was written on U.S. coins and currency. That continues up till now. Historian David S. Reynolds wrote, quote, A spirit of national unity guided Abraham Lincoln's 9 proclamations of prayer, thanksgiving, and fasting during the war." So during this terrible war, he was seeing the country, North and South, as one. President Lincoln had his requirement for the Confederate States to be readmitted to the Union when they finally were defeated in the war. 10% of voters from the 1860 election, eligible voters, who would take a loyalty, if they had 10% of the voters from the 1860 election willing to take a loyalty oath to the United States, and also those states agreed to abolish slavery, then they could re-enter the Union. Louisiana, Arkansas, and Tennessee met those conditions and elected representatives, but Congress still had to approve that. So that meant those 3 Confederate states were in the process of rejoining the Union. Summer of 1864 was tough times, a lot of terrible fighting. In 6 weeks of fighting, and during that summer, 100,000 Union soldiers were killed or wounded. Newspaper editor Horace Greeley said, quote, "Our bleeding, bankrupt, almost dying country, the prospect of fresh conscriptions, of further wholesale devastations, and of new rivers of human blood." Now, that summer of 1864, there was talk in the South of freeing the slaves to serve in the Confederate Army, that they realized they also needed more slaves. Now, that really meant ending slavery in the South. But again, there were some African Americans who did serve in the Confederate Army, not as many as in the North. On June 16th, President Lincoln gave a speech in Philadelphia, and he said, quote, "War at best is terrible, and this war of ours, in its magnitude and duration, is one of the most terrible. It has damaged business. It has destroyed property and ruined homes. It has produced a national debt and taxation unprecedented. It has carried mourning to almost every home until it can almost be said that the heavens are hung in black. We accepted this war for a worthy object, and the war will end when the object is attained." President Lincoln, regarding the ambulances carrying the wounded to the hospital in Washington City, said, quote, "Look yonder at those poor fellows. I cannot bear it. This suffering, this loss of life is dreadful." In July of 1864, Congress passed a harsh Reconstruction Bill in which President Lincoln vetoed. And he compared that bill to Procrustes, an ancient Roman tyrant who had supposedly, if he had captives or prisoners, he would have one bed for all of his prisoners in war or politically. And if the captive was too short, he would stretch the person. So this is basically torture. And if he was too long, he would chop off his feet. This is terrible. So anyway, nice reference to ancient Rome. Radicals were trying to divide the Republican Party. On July 11th, Washington City was in danger. Confederate troops were 5 miles from the White House. 1864 was a summer of despondency. There seemed to be no end in sight to the war. A friend of President Lincoln, Joshua Speed, from Richmond, from Illinois, Springfield, Illinois, visited President Lincoln and the White House, and Lincoln was reading the Bible. And he said to Speed, quote, "Take all the Bible upon reason that you can, and the balance on faith, and you will live and die a happier and better man." So President Lincoln really needed help, and so he did get help from God and from the Bible. Confederate soldiers were in Silver Spring, Maryland in the summer of 1864, and they came to the home of Montgomery Blair, one of the members of the cabinet, and they ransacked his house. Confederate General John Breckinridge stopped the ransacking because Blair was his friend, and he left a note of apology. President Lincoln watched a skirmish at Fort Stevens, 5 miles from the White House. Also that summer, the Confederate Army under General Early came to Chambersburg, Pennsylvania, demanding a ransom of $500,000 on July 30th, which was not paid, and the town was set on fire. President Lincoln said during this time, quote, "I claim not to have controlled events, but confess plainly that events have controlled me. Now, at the end of 3 years' struggle, the nation's condition is not what either party or any man devised or expected. God alone can claim it." Now, there was pressure on General Ulysses S. Grant to run for president in 1864, and Grant said, quote, "They can't do it. They can't compel me to do it." Grant said that he considered it, quote, "as important for the cause that President Lincoln should be reelected as that the Army should be successful in the field." So he saw President Lincoln's reelection as important to winning the war. General Grant said to President Lincoln at this time, quote, "If the thing is pressed, I think General Lee will surrender." And President Lincoln responded, quote, "Let the thing be pressed." President Lincoln was committed to the Union and ending slavery. Black troops were needed to win the war. By this time, there were 200,000 black troops in the Union Army. And President Lincoln said, if these black soldiers were forced to return to slavery, quote, "I should be damned in time and in eternity for so doing." During that summer, there was a Union victory in Mobile, Alabama. The Union Navy fleet braved enemy mines in Mobile Bay, and Union Admiral David Farragut had the same famous quotation, quote, "Damn the torpedoes, full speed, go ahead." Yes, there was this great need for black troops in the Union Army because they needed guys. This was unpopular with some people in the North, and it was believed this was hurting his reelection chances. President Lincoln said, quote, "What is the presidency to me if I have no country?" So in other words, they would lose the war without black troops. August, hard times for the country. There was a fighting in Petersburg, Virginia, slaughter of Union troops, a raid in Washington City, despondency in the North. President Lincoln wanted Frederick Douglass to organize a mission to go to the South and recruit slaves to leave and come north and join the Union Army. In August, a Union regiment from Ohio visited the White House and President Lincoln, and Lincoln said to them, quote, "I happen temporarily to occupy this White House. I'm a living witness that any one of your children may look to come here, as my father's child has. It is in order that each of you may have, through this free government which we have enjoyed, an open field and a fair chance for your industry, enterprise, and intelligence, that you may all have equal privileges in the race of life, with all its desirable human aspirations. It is for this the struggle should be maintained, that we may not lose our birthright. The nation is worth fighting for to secure an inestimable jewel." August 19th, President Lincoln had his second meeting with Frederick Douglass. During the meeting, Connecticut Governor William Buckingham came to speak to President Lincoln, and he was told to wait. And President Lincoln said he wanted to have a long talk with, quote, "my friend Frederick Douglass." The Emancipation, President Lincoln said the Emancipation brought 200,000 black troops into the Union effort and removed 200,000 men who were supporting the Confederacy. So that was key. Now, there was talk of appeasing the South to end the war and bring back slavery, or accept slavery in the South. If the South surrendered, and then under this negotiation, the North would accept slavery in the South. President Lincoln said, quote, "I should be damned in time and eternity for so doing. The world shall know that I will keep my faith to friends and enemies, come what will." So he was not going to back down on that. Now, he said that this idea of ending emancipation would ruin the Union cause. It would end the recruiting of black troops. Black troops would desert. Why they wouldn't want to join the Union Army if they were going to have freedom. And President Lincoln said, quote, "Why should they give their lives for us with full notice of our purpose to betray them? As a matter of morals, could such treachery by any possibility escape the curses of heaven or of any good man?" So these were hard times, late summer of 1864. President Lincoln was out walking one evening in Washington City with a friend. They were interrupted. A man came up to him with a paper and said, "Mr. Lincoln, this is the only opportunity I have to speak to you. Please consider my case." President Lincoln lost his temper. He was tired, of course, and overwhelmed, and he walked away. After a short distance, he stopped and he said to his friend, quote, "John, I treated that man shamefully. I must go back." So he returned to the man, gave him his card, and asked him to see him the next day in the White House. After pardoning a deserter who had been condemned to death for some misdeed in the Union Army, in answer to the prayer of his mother, President Lincoln said, quote, "Perhaps I have done wrong, but at all events I have made that poor woman happy." 2.5 million men enlisted in the Union Army, and more than 2 million of the men were under age 21, some as young as 15. So these were young guys who easily could get, and under a lot of stress. A lot of them deserted. During this time, President Lincoln stopped the execution of 24 deserters, and he said, quote, "There are too many weeping widows. For God's sakes, don't ask me to add to their number, for I won't do it." Now, there was a belief during the summer that President Lincoln would lose in the election, his re-election efforts, because he was unpopular, because of the war, and President Lincoln believed that if he lost the election, that the war would be lost. General George B. McClellan was nominated by the for president by the Democrats. On September 3rd, the Union Army took Atlanta, Georgia. So this was a big deal under the leadership of General William Tecumseh Sherman. Major victory for the Union. And this really changed the mood in the North and helped make people more positive about winning the war. There are some of the campaign slogans of President Lincoln were "No peace without victory," "Union and liberty," "Freedom to all men." General Grant and General Sherman were both very popular for their success in the war. Union soldiers loved Abraham Lincoln. Mobile, Alabama was also taken during this time. Union soldiers were calling President Lincoln Father Abraham. David S. Reynolds wrote about General William Tecumseh Sherman, amazing, wonderful middle name, the Shawnee Indian Tecumseh, quote, "When he marched through Georgia, swarms of freedmen trailed his army, hailing him as a godlike liberator." There's a good story. William Tecumseh Sherman's wife was Catholic, and a Catholic priest asked him when Sherman had become a Catholic. And Sherman said, quote, "I told him my wife had Catholicity enough for a very large family, and that my Catholicity was more Catholic than his, as mine embraced all creation, recognized the Maker as its head, and all religions, past, present, and future, as simple tools in the great accomplishment yet to be. A little too transcendental for Father Gallagher." Good story. Now, General McClellan, the nominee by the Democrats for president, his platform was to negotiate peace with the South, independence for the Confederate States of America, and the acceptance of slavery in the South. In other words, the war would be lost. And Union soldiers were very much against this idea. Confederate soldiers believed that if General McClellan won the war, that the South could win. That would mean that peace would come and they would achieve independence. During this time, there siege Petersburg, Virginia, which supported Richmond, was under siege, and by the Union soldiers. Confederates were shouting across the lines, encouraging Union troops to vote for McClellan. In other words, this had the opposite effect. That encouraged the Union troops to vote for President Lincoln. September 4th, President Lincoln said, quote, "The purposes of the Almighty are perfect. They must prevail, though we, erring mortals, may fail to accurately perceive them in advance. We hoped for a happy termination of this terrible war long before this, but God knows best and has ruled otherwise. Meanwhile, we must work earnestly in the best light He gives us, trusting that so working still conduces to the great ends He ordains. Surely He intends some great good to follow this mighty convulsion, which no mortal could make and no mortal could stay." On September 22nd, John C. Fremont, who was considering running as an independent, he withdrew. September 23rd, Montgomery Blair, President Lincoln asked for his resignation because Blair was in conflict with other cabinet members. Now, laughter was indispensable, raising President Lincoln's spirits. He enjoyed the writings of humorist Petroleum V. Nasby. In October, Union General Sheridan defeated General Early at Cedar Creek, Virginia, and Sheridan was becoming very popular as well. Historian Stephen B. Oates said, quote, "In his search for the meaning of this vast struggle, Abraham Lincoln had come to view the Civil War as a divine punishment for the sin of slavery, as a terrible retribution by God on a guilty people in North as well as South. There was a storytelling played a central role in President Lincoln's ability to communicate with the public. And President Lincoln did indeed nominate Salmon Chase for the Supreme Court, showed his magnanimity and his forgiveness. Chase had been intriguing against Lincoln while in his cabinet, but President Lincoln believed that Chase was the right man for the country. This shows the greatness of Abraham Lincoln. John Rock was a black lawyer from Massachusetts. He was denied practice before the U.S. Supreme Court based on race. The new Supreme Court Justice Salmon Chase allowed Rock to be involved in Supreme Court cases, and this was the first time a black lawyer was involved in the Supreme Court. Major progress in civil rights. In October, Sojourner Truth visited President Lincoln in the White House. Sojourner Truth had been a slave, sold 3 times, and escaped to freedom, and she was involved in the Underground Railroad, helping slaves come north to freedom. And Sojourner Truth said that, quote, she, quote, never was treated by anyone with more kindness and cordiality. Regarding her visit with President Lincoln, I felt that I was in the presence of a friend. President Lincoln had strong support from Protestant Christians, and he said, quote, God bless the Methodist Church. God bless all the churches, and blessed be God, who in this our great trial giveth us the churches. November 8th was Election Day. President Lincoln received 2.2 million votes. General George McClellan 1.8 million. In the Electoral College, President Lincoln won 221 votes and McClellan 21. So President Lincoln was reelected and for a second term. There were threats against the president's life, ongoing threats. William Seward, Secretary of State, continued to be the president's closest political friend. Supreme Court Chief Justice Roger Taney died October 12th, and President Lincoln, as we said, nominated Salmon Chase as his replacement. Lincoln admired General William Tecumseh Sherman, and especially when he captured Atlanta, Georgia, his famous March to the Sea, trying to get to destroy morale in the South so they would surrender. A 50-mile wide destruction of railroads, burning businesses and homes, to destroy the morale of the South. Sherman said, quote, "War is cruelty, and you cannot refine it." So this was his famous march to Savannah, Georgia. Another story, Lydia Bixby, a Boston widow, lost 5 sons in the war, and President Lincoln wrote her a letter of consolation. President Lincoln was reviewing capital sentences, in other words, death sentence for soldiers who had been court-martialed, and he continued to issue many pardons. At the same time, he was hoping that there would be the passage of an amendment in the Constitution to abolish slavery. President Lincoln took few precautions to protect for security for himself. He often took long walks in Washington City late at night alone. After his re-election, there were many office seekers at the White House, and President Lincoln said every visitor, quote, darted at him and with thumb and finger carried off a portion of his vitality. And in the election, Union soldiers by large numbers supported and voted for President Lincoln's re-election. There was a campaign song that Union soldiers were singing leading up to the election. Quote, "Lincoln is the man we need. Johnson, too, is handy. Yankee Doodle, boys. Hurrah for Uncle Abe and Andy. We've got a grant from Abraham to beat the rebels hollow. And we have a man to lead, while we're the boys to follow." President Lincoln said, quote, "If it was wrong in the South to hold slaves, it was wrong in the North to carry on the slave trade and sell them to the South." So this is an important point. The North and South were both responsible for the slave trade. And in the North, there were textile mills where they were buying cotton from the South, which had been cultivated by black slaves. Union soldiers, and there was a Union soldier in Pennsylvania 2 weeks after the election who said, quote, "His future history will place Abraham Lincoln's name next to George Washington. The first, the founder, the second, the preserver of our country." Those are prophetic words. That has come to pass. Historian William C. Davis wrote, quote, "For 3 years, Union soldiers had seen Abraham Lincoln taking their welfare to heart, showing them kindness and concern, revealing on his perpetually careworn face that he shared the burden of their sufferings. The man who never lost faith in them, who gave them pride in themselves and hope for their cause." So it looked like victory was in sight. President Lincoln at Christmas was affirming the Union. And then there was this, as we said, this Thomas Nast was the illustrator who came out with a Christmas picture. And it depicted a Union Christmas dinner at the White House on a long table. And one side of the table that showed each of the northern states seated at the table. On the opposite side of the table were empty seats with the names of the southern states, which showed that President Lincoln was waiting to welcome southern states back into the Union. David S. Reynolds wrote, quote, "By having Abraham Lincoln invite Southerners to resume their seats at the national table in a Christmas context, Nast was projecting the president's compassionate attitude to all Americans." David S. Reynolds wrote, quote, "Abraham Lincoln found that William Shakespeare's universal appeal lay in his depiction of shared human qualities: disloyalty, jealousy, revenge, hatred, madness, self-destruction, tomfoolery, devotion, faith, and depression. In particular, Shakespeare's dark passages reflected the agony he experienced during the war. Melancholy Shakespearean passages provided him with relief." New Year's Day of 1865, there was a reception at the White House, the annual reception for New Year's Day, and there was optimism. General Sherman captured Savannah, Georgia before Christmas, raising spirits in the North. And of course, Sherman's march to the sea through Georgia, a lot of destruction of the railroads and cotton and so forth. Historian Doris Kearns Goodwin wrote, quote, "Though the military gains justified the march in the minds of Union soldiers, The memory of its terrible impact on civilian lives haunts the South to this day. Yeah, there's still anger in the South, and actually even hatred of General Sherman for what he did. But it was war, and they really needed the South to give up and for them to realize that they needed to surrender. General George Thomas achieved victory in Nashville in mid-December, still fighting there. In mid-January was the fall of Fort Fisher, which guarded Wilmington, North Carolina, leading to the closure of the port of Wilmington, which shut off supplies from abroad. The Confederate States of America was completely shut out of all foreign trade. Well, that concludes today's presentation. We'll continue next time with Part 18. Good luck to you with your efforts in history. There's so many wonderful history books to read out there. You might consider checking out our website, Adventures in History with Peter J. Ray at peterjray.com. So far, we've made 732 history videos in 8 areas: world history, American history, book reviews, poetic tours, Cleveland baseball, family history, autobiography, and Cleveland basketball. There's a donate feature. You might consider making a donation to support this work. You also might consider subscribing to our channel. Thanks so much for watching. I really appreciate it. God bless you. Take care, and I'll see you next time.